If you're anything like me in 2024 and a lot of 2025 so far, I've been spending a lot of money on OpenAI's API. And I stumbled upon a really interesting Reddit post about cutting costs on OpenAI's API. And I figured I'd share that with you guys and give you a little bit more of an in depth breakdown on how you could use some of these methods to save a couple bucks on your own integrations. All right, so let's dive into it. So, Tellin7 here put together a really interesting post on Reddit. He says here he spent 9,500,000,000 OpenAI tokens in the month of January of this year, 2025. And he found some ways to optimize his costs by 40%. I just wanted to dive into the different methods that he describes here. But first things first, there's an important concept to understand, which are tokens. If you're not familiar with the concept, there's a ton of different articles out there that sort of describe it. But basically, tokens are basically the smallest unit of measure for an AI LLM. And it essentially is sort of a building block for a large language model, right? So that could be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be a letter. It is essentially a way to unitize and break down pieces of data to be processed. Okay. I pulled up this article here because they have a really nice diagram set up, which is the comparison in tokens between these two statements. So if you see here, what is AI requirements management? That comes down to 6 tokens, 35 characters, versus AI requirements management is the use of artificial intelligence to automate, etc. That this paragraph or sentence or two here comes out to 48 tokens and 296 characters. So that's important because all of the OpenAI's pricing is based around the number of tokens that are sent and received. So the first thing that he calls out here is the model. He says here, choosing the right model is crucial. So in this example, he ended up using the 4.0 mini model, which if we look at the pricing here, we're going to see a pretty big variance in the pricing depending on the model that is used. So like we said before, these pricings are based on tokens. So they're saying 1 million tokens cost this amount for the input and this amount for the output. They also have a cached column, which we'll get to. But in the example of the 4.0, it costs $2.50 for 1 million tokens versus GPT 4.0 mini comes down to 15 cents. The output is about 4 times higher here, but it comes out to 60 cents versus $10 on the 4.0. So based on his use cases, everybody's use case is different. But I think for a large portion of the population, the 4.0 mini may work just fine. So I wouldn't always opt into using the latest and the greatest and the strongest model because you probably don't need it and you end up just costing yourself a ton of money. And he's saying the same thing here essentially. He was initially using GPT-4 and then he switched over to 4.0 mini, which essentially he's cut his costs down by more than half, right? You go from $2.50 for the 4.0 to 15 cents for the 4.0 mini, right? Pretty significant change. The other concept here that he brings up is prompt caching. So prompt caching is a very important component to how the API works to reduce latency and try to cut some costs down. So essentially for prompts that contain repetitive content, such as system prompts or common instructions, OpenAI will automatically cache those requests and just give you the cached response. Rather than think about it and process it, it will just give you that cached response. Why is that helpful? According to them, it lowers latency by up to 80%, while also cutting costs by 50% for longer prompts. This happens automatically. This is not a flag that gets sent in the API. So this is built into the APIs directly. OpenAI has a pretty robust in-depth document here that breaks down exactly how it all works. But at a high level, for prompts that contain 1,024 tokens or more, you will start using caching on those requests, which should lower costs. So the next thing that he sort of gives advice on or warns about is setting up billing alerts. Some people may be making requests without realizing and costing themselves a whole bunch of money. Billing requests, billing alerts, super important on really any API that is of this nature. So if you go to platform.openai.com and then you go to the gear icon on the right here, it'll bring you to settings. So under the billing section here, you'll see, your balance, all the details that you have there, but you could come down to the usage limits. And in the usage limits section, which you could also just access from the limits on the left side, you can set a budget alert. And based on that budget alert and budget limit, you can specify it to be what you see fit for your budget. That way you don't overspend on API credits. Next important factor here that he brings up is the output tokens. So like we said before in the pricing, there's the input and there's the output, right? So when you're sending data to the GPT, you are making an input request versus when you get a response back, you're making an output request. As he accurately describes here, the output token price is about 4 times the price, right? This here is $2.50. The output is $10 on the 4 ohm versus 15 and 60 cents on the 4 ohm mini. So, pretty big discrepancy there, and it's important to call that out. So he says here, try to structure your prompts in a way that minimize the number of outputs that come back. So for example, when you're making a request, you may say, don't send me all of the details again. I already have the original details, just append to it the new details. So rather than it sending you the entire request that it had previously sent with the new details, you should just get returned the new details. And that will lead to a lower output cost. And a really important one here that he calls out as well is consolidating your requests. Each API ends up costing you money. So grouping up those requests into singular prompts or grouped up prompts will lead to a lower cost. In his example here, instead of splitting out as request 1, analyze the sentiment, request 2, extract keywords, request 3, categorize, he makes 1 request and lists them out in a numbered format. Last but not least, he talks about the concept of batch API. So what batch API is, it is essentially a way for you to send bulk requests to OpenAI, and you essentially tell them, hey, process these requests when you see most fit, and in return, you will get a lower price or lower cost on that request. However, it will take around 24 hours to turn that around. Unlike other API requests where the response is instantaneous, these batch requests take some time for you to get the results. So you should be utilizing this tool when you are processing large sets of data and you may not need the output right this moment. For example, if you're running a calculation that you are able to wait 24 hours on, you could make a batch API request and then it will cost you about 50% less to process that request than it would otherwise. So batch API, great feature, very useful to use. And they include that on the pricing as well. If you toggle up here the batch API pricing, so the mini is 15 cents on the non-batch pricing, but goes down to 0.075, and before it was 60, now it goes down to 0.30. But also realize here, not all of their APIs have batch API requests, so your usage and your mileage may vary depending on which model you're using. But if you stick to the 4.0 mini, you're going to get a lot of savings there. A lot of great findings from this Reddit post. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Tillin7 here. Put together a great little post. Really enjoyed it. I hope you guys learned something new from this video. And if you have any questions about OpenAI's API or other AI API questions in general, please do not hesitate to drop a comment down below and I will get back to you and respond to all the comments. And as always, guys, I would appreciate a like, comment, and subscribe on the video. It really helps the channel grow. And I wish you the best of luck out there, guys. Good luck.